Scourge 16? What happened to the other 15 Scourges? How much health does he have? Yes! Final Fantasy, the last-second Hail Mary play for a struggling software developer named Square. Final Fantasy originally released in 1987 on the Famicom in Japan, and then was ported to the Nintendo Entertainment System in the US in 1990. It was the brainchild of Hironobu Sakaguchi as his final attempt at game development. If he didn't succeed here, Sakaguchi planned to head back to university, leaving behind game development entirely. Final Fantasy was heavily inspired by Dungeons & Dragons, Dragon Quest, The Legend of Zelda, and the Ultima series. In a 2015 interview, Sakaguchi stated that the team also wanted to abbreviate the game as FF, which would sound good in their native Japanese. The team originally wanted to call the game Fighting Fantasy, but a role-playing gamebook series of the same name forced them to change their minds. On a personal note, the Final Fantasy franchise has been incredibly impactful on my life. I have been heavily inspired by the stories, characters, and lore of the different worlds the series has brought to life. I have devoted countless hours to the franchise throughout its many iterations and have transformed my love for the games into my real-life passions of playing and writing music, which is a topic I will further expand upon in a future episode. While over 10 different versions of this game have been released over the years, for the purposes of this video, I will mostly be showing footage from the Pixel Remaster version, which is available on Steam at the time of this recording and is still on sale as a bundle. I'm not sponsored or anything, but if you are watching Square Enix, how you doing? Before we get started on an actual playthrough, I wanted to highlight the Explorer's Handbook. The Explorer's Handbook basically replaced the game manual and was practically a mini Nintendo Power magazine that was packaged with the game itself. This goes from the basics of how to converse with an NPC, to the comprehensive fold-out maps, spell list, equipment, and bestiary. So, spoiler alerts, without even playing the game, you can read that Chaos is probably going to be an important fight at some point. This handbook is so iconic, it is actually still available from Nintendo themselves. I'll place a link in the description below. Check it out, it's actually pretty neat. Upon booting up the game, we are greeted with one of, at the time, unique features of this game. We get to customize our party of 4 adventurers. For this playthrough, 4 of my Patreon supporters got to choose their names and classes. We have Fistel the Thief, Shinzero the Black Belt, 2 red mages, one of which named Mystical One, and Bran for the other. After getting everybody squared away, we begin our adventure. We begin outside of the town of Cornelia, or Corneria if you're playing a previous version, or you just want to imagine Star Fox in Final Fantasy.
Do a barrel roll!
In which our party takes a moment to purchase supplies before heading to the castle to begin the story. It turns out that we are the Warriors of Light, each of us clutching a crystal that has faded over time. The elements of earth, wind, water, and fire are corrupted, but a prophecy exists explaining that the 4 Warriors of Light would rejuvenate the elements and restore balance to the world. And who knows, we might even possibly summon Captain Planet if we can find Heart along the way. The King of Cornelia gives us our first quest. The best swordsman of the land, Garland, has kidnapped Princess Sarah and is holed up in the nearby Chaos Temple. After a few battles to gather our bearings in combat, we head to the Chaos Temple to have our showdown with the best swordsman in the land. And we promptly whoop his ass. Now this is a great time to talk about a few of the combat differences between the Pixel Remaster version and the original NES Final Fantasy. In the original, when an enemy is slain, but another attack has been already queued on it, you will receive the most disheartening message in 8-bit gaming. Ineffective.
Stop! He's already dead!
That's right. Attacking a corpse will not net you any type of tactical advantage in a fight. While this can be frustrating, and eliminated the mashing of the A button to speed through fights, I also view it as both a tactical choice and a callback to the age of the game. Obviously, in future games, this nuance would change, but this really illustrates the source material they were drawing on for inspiration. Fortunately, the Pixel Remaster made some quality of life changes which introduced an auto battle feature. This greatly increases the speed of combat and will now use the previously entered command on the next living enemy. After our sweet victory, we travel back to Corellia. We are rewarded by the king, who finally decides to improve the local infrastructure by having the northern bridge rebuilt. Now the Warriors of Light can continue their journey to rekindle the crystals. Princess Sarah also rewards us with a lute, and so perhaps maybe one day we too may sing a song about tossing a coin to our witcher. So we head north, and for the first time, we hear the defining theme in the series. This theme is so triumphant and emotional that it was even chosen as one of the pieces during the opening ceremony for the 2020 Tokyo Olympics. The main theme is iconic and will be featured in almost every single Final Fantasy game in the franchise. Shortly after crossing the newly built bridge, we stumble upon a cave that a blind witch named Matoya calls her home. Then we head east to the town of Provoca, where we promptly get in a brawl with 9 pirates, which is the maximum amount of enemies that we could have on the screen, so it looks a lot more intimidating than it actually is. We emerge victorious, and we are gifted a boat by a suddenly shipless scallywag. As an aside, I would like to mention another huge difference, specifically in the Pixel Remaster version, the tile overlap bug, colloquially known as the Peninsula of Power. It has been patched out. The Peninsula of Power was a well-known grinding spot, where a canny adventurer could have random encounters with much higher level enemies. With a merciless application of Fire 2, many levels of experience and gold could be quickly earned. Of all the changes that they could have made to this version, dear God, why did they do this one? Damn you, Square! In any case, next we head on to the elven city of Elfheim, or Elfland, depending on the version. We do some grinding to afford some new equipment and speak to the elves of the city. We find out that Astos, the Dark Elf, had stolen the Mystic Crown and placed a sleeping spell on the Prince of Elfheim. To help the elves, we must head to Astos' abode. After leaving the city of Elfheim, we head to the Western Keep and find a broken elf king. He tells us that the Mystic Crown is now in Astos' abode, the Marsh Cave, which in my opinion is the most difficult dungeon in the game. Now, let's backtrack a little bit. For young Dan, the Marsh Cave might as well have been the end of this game. As in the NES version, the difficulty spike was massive. While the enemies here aren't overly deadly, their ability to inflict poison was, which caused damage with every step in the field and HP loss during battle. At this early stage in the game, the only way to reliably remove poison was to use antidote items, which were expensive to buy. Frustratingly, the spell Pure was also level 4, so our early level adventurers lacked the ability to cast it multiple times between rests. This caused Marsh Cave to be a very tedious and unfun grind. Fortunately, in the Pixel Remaster, this isn't nearly as much of a hurdle. The prices of all the store purchases have been greatly reduced, a change that was copied from the PlayStation Final Fantasy Origins release and was thusly called Easy Mode. The Pixel Remaster version also has the expanded item assortment from the Game Boy Advance releases, such as elixirs, ethers, and Phoenix Downs. These items give the player much more flexibility when battling through long dungeons or at times without the ability to rest. Another hurdle from the NES version is the lack of in-game mapping for dungeons. And if you didn't have the Explorer's Handbook, as I previously had mentioned, a lot of times it could be a little bit overwhelming. If you didn't have a photographic dungeon memory like myself, it could be a rather frustrating experience. So the addition of an on-screen maps as well as a full dungeon map also relieved some of the difficulty of the Marsh Cave, which is a welcome modernization for most. However, you do have the ability to turn it off or never look at the full map if you want to go for that original feel. After navigating deep into the Marsh Cave and finding the Mystic Crown, we head back to the King of the Elves in his fallen castle. Upon returning the crown, the king reveals his true nature, who is none other than Astos himself. After a fierce battle, we loot a crystal eye, which we take back to Matoya the Blind Witch in an effort to relieve her blindness. Now that she can see, she gives us an herb to awaken the elf prince, who, upon awakening, gives us the mystic key. In a Metroidvania style, the key actually allows us to go treasure hunting in almost every previous location that we had visited. We find the TNT from Corellia Castle, which allows the industrious, infrastructure-minded Scottish dwarves to blow open the canal so that we can further explore the world in our pirate ship. Escaping the initial area always felt like such a huge accomplishment as a kid, but from a design standpoint, it really is just a lengthy prologue culminating in blowing open this canal. Because once you get through the canal, the quest for the crystals actually begins. Here the game really opens up with a huge world to explore. As a kid, it really gave me the feeling of freedom and exploration that very few other games replicated. However, Final Fantasy gave you few warnings, so you could actually veer into an area with much stronger enemies who would show your adventurers no mercy in battle. Personally, I like to go to Crescent Lake and buy whatever equipment I can afford before heading into the Earth Cave. The Earth Cave is home to a vampire, whose destruction nets us the Star Ruby. When the Star Ruby is given to a road-blocking ogre, he promptly clears off so that we can get to Sage Sada, who gives us his rod. The rod allows us to enter the depths of the Earth Cave and defeat the Lich, the Fiend of Earth, restoring the Crystal of Earth to its former luster. Another thing of note, the Pixel Remaster version removed the Hallway of Giants, an infamous loop with a 100% encounter rate, where every step would result in a difficult battle with multiple giants. They replaced it with 2 wandering NPCs. When spoken to, would trigger the giant fight, but will only respawn if you leave the cave and then come back. After leaving the Earth Cave and returning to Crescent Lake, the Circle of Sages gives us a canoe. The canoe opens up the path to the 𝐂𝐍𝐍𝐄𝐂𝐓 volcano to restore the Fire Crystal, but we are going to take quite a detour. In all of my playthroughs, I like to go to the Ice Cave first and obtain the Floater/Levistone, depending on whichever version you're playing, which allows us to unlock the airship. Now that we can soar through the clouds, truly opening up the world to explore, we head to the Castle of Ordeals next. We obtained the Rat Tail, a simple token requested by the King of the Dragons, Bahamut, as proof of our courage. He rewards us with one of the coolest features in Final Fantasy, the class change. This always felt like our characters were growing up. Not only do their character sprites change, but our access to abilities and equipment improve as well. For instance, the Black Belt goes from being a yellow belt to not having a belt. He is no longer restricted. But this also allows our airship-equipped adventurers to travel the world and collect the best equipment and spells that we can afford. Sadly, due to our Patreon chosen party for this playthrough, this really isn't all that many options. Now that we are all grown up and equipped, we head to the volcano. We dispatch of 𝐂𝐍𝐶, the Fiend of Fire. With our newfound abilities, we get a little carried away, as 𝐂𝐍𝐶 is a little bit of a pushover. Next, we head to the caravan in the desert to purchase the fairy in a bottle. We release the fairy at the spring in Gaia, and she rewards us with the 𝐂𝐎𝐍𝐿, an item that allows us to breathe underwater. We travel to Onrak, hop in a barrel, and descend into the water shrine where we grab the Rosetta Stone and we dispatch of Kraken, the Fiend of Water. After plunging into the drink and cracking the Kraken, we are in need of some air drying. So the only logical thing to do is to locate the air shrine. To do so, we head back to Melmond and speak to Dr. 𝐿, who teaches us a brand new language in about 30 seconds or so before heading to Lefenia to get the wind chime. In your face, Duolingo. Which allows us access to the Mirage Tower and then the Flying Fortress. Now the Mirage Tower and Flying Fortress are pretty straightforward dungeon crawls. While inside, we see a hole in the fortress. which shows us beams of energy radiating from all of the previous elemental dungeons, and they converge on the Chaos Temple, the same Chaos Temple, where we fought the best swordsmen in the land. We make our way through the rest of the Flying Fortress, and on the pathway to Tiamat? I don't know. Anyway, resides the most difficult enemy in the game, Warmech. Ironically, I've never actually had trouble defeating it in any of my playthroughs. Well, except for this one. In the original Final Fantasy, enemy skill usage was scripted. So for instance, in round 1, the enemy would attack. In round 2, it may cast fire. Round 3, it may attack again, and etc. In the Pixel Remaster version, there is no script. Each skill is given a percentage chance to be used. So, in theory, very powerful skills could be used again and again and again, perhaps breaking your party's ability to deal with the damage input. Like Nuke, for example. Although rare, you can see how Warmech using Nuke in 3 out of 4 turns just completely annihilated our party. After getting our revenge on Warmech and defeating Tiamat, the Fiend of Wind, we head back to the Chaos Temple. Now, JRPGs have a stereotype of plot lines getting really convoluted and weird, usually due to the writers trying to include some type of dreaded plot twist. Now, Final Fantasy may have personally laid the foundation for this trope with the odd conclusion that comes after the Flying Fortress. So apparently, Garland, best swordsman in the land, is actually the archdemon Chaos. He wasn't just hiding in some random temple. That was his home! Now, upon their defeat, the 4 fiends rip open a portal in time, casting Chaos back in time, which allows him to send the 4 fiends forward in time so that he could live forever. Oh boy. He started the prophecy of the Light Warriors to enable all of this to start happening, I guess. Honestly, I'm gonna be real honest here. The time travel paradox was probably not the easiest plot device to use, but here we are. And it birthed one of the greatest franchises of all time. So for all we know, maybe Sakaguchi was a time traveler as well. Who knows? Anyways, we have to remember that up to this point, prior RPGs really didn't do much anything for a story, other than maybe telling you the names and places or a vague hint of something to do. So this was definitely an improvement on storytelling in video games that ended up setting a lofty and complicated precedent for the entire franchise to come. Back to the game. The Warriors of Light head back in time. They use the power of rock,
Toss a coin to your witcher,
aka the loot, to head deeper into the Temple of Fiends, formerly known as the Chaos Temple. In an early boss rush style, we again defeat the 4 fiends, leaving only one, Chaos himself. Everything has led to this, the climactic battle. Sadly, in every other version I've played of this game, Chaos was a pushover. However, looks like we got some buffs for him in the Pixel Remaster. And holy hell did they increase the difficulty. Look at how close this fight was! After defeating Chaos, you have beaten the game, and the slowest word crawl that has ever existed begins. Now, the original Final Fantasy will always be a huge beacon of nostalgia for me. From the quirkiness of combat to the franchise-defining music, the sense of exploration, and the freedom of choice. The game itself wasn't overwhelming with its dialogue. It really allowed the player to fill in the gaps of the story with their own internal narrative. Now, these factors really set it apart from many other RPG franchises of the time, and honestly, even over the years. The memories of the games, my delight in playing them, and the inspiration that they have given me is really what drove me to begin this series of replaying through and in reviewing the entire franchise. So, does this game still hold up today? Sure it does. But I may recommend some of the other versions besides the NES original, If you're looking for an easier playthrough that also looks gorgeous while being very polished, I would recommend the PSP version. Mostly due to the fact that it changes the magic usage from spell points, more like the D&D style, to MP or magic points that is more in the modern line of gaming. Starting with the GBA versions and beyond, most now also have extra content and dungeons as post-game material. So you can look into many of these other options as well if you're really wanting to get even more out of your Final Fantasy experience. Personally, I really enjoyed the Pixel Remaster, as the music remixes are just straight S tier, and I really don't mind an easier experience, as you know, honestly, I proved my grit in my youth, looking at you, Marsh Cave. As part of our complete franchise series, I'll also be remixing a music track from each of the entries to release a Final Fantasy album later. So for Final Fantasy I, here's a short sample of the Chaos Temple remix, which I have titled 4 White Mages is Chaotic. Final Fantasy secured the financial future for Square. Well, for the time being. But to find out what happened next, you'll have to tune in to the next installment of the series. A reminder that I do play these as part of our streaming content on both Twitch and YouTube every Friday as part of our Final Fantasy Fridays. I also wanted to take a quick second here to thank all of my patrons, as you guys are like the flux capacitor of my content and you helped make this entire thing possible. Thank you so much. So until next time, adventurers, praise be to Yevon.